if Starlink and other companies now also want to do this, they want to launch these large constellations of satellites. If they all do that as well, and we have, not tens of thousands of satellites, but maybe 100,000 or 200,000 satellites, astrobiology is our quest to understand the nature of life. Our ancestors long ago, they would look up and see the moon. They had a lot of stories for what the moon was, and stories that connected their lives and their history and their spiritual practices and their moral practices to what the moon was doing. People throw around a lot of terms out there. People have called me like a doomer and things like that. A regressivist and all kinds of things. And what are our moral obligations to the AI itself as we develop it? Should we encode any kind of moral philosophy in AI?
Well, kind of diving into it with you, can you give us the 30,000-foot view of your kind of path, career, some kind of key moments in your story?
Yeah, the one that I share a lot is when I was 5 years old, and this is going to date me a little bit. In 1988, the film Young Einstein came out in movie theaters here in the U.S. It was released in 1987. It was a film written, starring, produced, directed by one guy from Australia by the name of Yahoo Serious. Some folks might recall back in the 90s, he tried suing Yahoo over name infringement, but Yahoo comes from Gulliver's Travels. This movie was called Young Einstein, but it was kind of a fabrication of a story of the life of Einstein, where in this story, he grows up in Tasmania on an apple farm, and creates this new theory of E equals MC squared to split atoms of beer to put bubbles into beer. And then he goes to the mainland of Australia to try to patent this idea. So totally not true at all, and not related to the real life of Einstein. But in the film, there's really cool scientific statements about the nature of relativity and the movement of light and time. And as a young 5-year-old seeing this in the theater, it got me thinking a lot about science and math and the laws of physics and nature. And then also it has a great 1980s rock soundtrack. And so really great bands from Australia from the 1980s playing rock music. In the movie, he makes his own electric guitar and it plays into the story. And so I went home that night at 5 years old, and I told my mother that I wanted to be a scientist and I wanted to play guitar. And so that night, I made my first shoebox guitar, and then I spent the night just whiling away in my head thinking about math and numbers and the universe. And it kind of set me on this path, which has deviated and meandered as everyone's paths do. But it took me to this place where I thought a lot about how can I become a Carl Sagan in the universe, or someone who delivers powerful monologues like Captain Picard in Star Trek: The Next Generation. I looked up to these great scientists of the past, these great philosophers and thinkers of the past. And so when I finally went to college and kind of was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I realized that there was a realm for me to pursue the sciences and philosophy and build a career that I wanted in this realm of being part of the space exploration process.
And so today you're an astrobiologist. And what is an astrobiologist?
Yeah, astrobiology, if you go online and look it up, it'll say it's the science of trying to understand the origins, the evolution, and distribution of life in the universe. But as I often like to say, astrobiology is our quest to understand the nature of life. It's practically everything. And so it's trying to understand the big questions of philosophy we've had for so very long. Who are we? Why are we here? What else is there? What is life? What is intelligence? What is consciousness? These really big, bold ideas that have been with humans for a very long time. And so those of us working in astrobiology, we work across different scientific disciplines, going out into the field here on Earth and understanding how life functions in various environments, doing modeling, trying to figure out how life might have emerged from chemistry in the early Earth, going to other worlds with robotic rovers and orbiters and things like that to study Mars or Venus or moons of our solar system, using telescopes to look at exoplanets. We've now found well over 5,000 exoplanets around other stars far away. And then some of us are also working in realms of education and philosophy and conceptual issues in astrobiology as well.
So how do you spend your time day to day?
Yeah, I used to focus a lot in geochemistry, which my background, I took degrees in biology and chemistry, did some astrophysics, and then did a PhD in geology. I wanted to do everything. But after my PhD, I still kept doing some of that research, but a lot of my more recent work is more in the realm of conceptual and philosophical issues. What happens if we meet aliens and communicate with them? Should we be sending messages intentionally out into space? How does thinking about alien life impact us here on Earth? some of those other kinds of questions that have come into this long scope of understanding our place in the universe.
Is there a most promising sign of extraterrestrial life that you've seen?
That's a really fun one. People ask me all the time, have we found anything yet? And my answer truly is no. We don't have any sufficient evidence of alien life yet. And there's this question that Enrico Fermi put to some people at a famous launch back in 1950. It's since been called the Fermi Paradox, even though it's not really a paradox. It's Fermi's question, which is basically like, where are they? And he was originally speaking about faster than light travel. He was saying if we could travel faster than light, and maybe other alien species could as well, then why aren't the aliens here right now everywhere across the galaxy? And that led to this larger idea from Fermi's question is why aren't we seeing the aliens yet? Why haven't we heard from them? And honestly, one of the best answers is we haven't really been looking that long and that well so far. Like even SETI so far hasn't really been looking in every wavelength of light that it's possible for aliens to send messages in. We've only been looking in certain areas and for a short period of time. And so there could be messages out there that have been coming to us. We haven't heard them yet. Or it could be that there are signs of life in the subsurface of Mars where we just haven't looked, or in the ocean of Europa, a moon of Jupiter, where we haven't looked there yet either. And there's a lot of other possibilities. There's a lot of ways to answer Fermi's question that include that aliens are out there and we're just missing out on something so far.
So in Mars, my understanding is we have 2 rovers there right now.
Two active rivers, yeah.
And maybe we've drilled just like a few inches and so if there's life there, the stronger possibility in your mind is well below the surface.
I personally think that if we want to find extant or extinct life on Mars, so either present or past life on Mars, we have to go deep. The Martian surface itself is extremely cold. There's a lot of radiation from space. Mars isn't being protected by a magnetic field the way we are. And then there's also a lot of these salts on the surface of Mars that break down organic material. And so just the characteristics of Mars' surface are not great for life as we know it to survive at the surface. But down below, there's probably a really great place where life could thrive. There might even be liquid water reservoirs deep in the subsurface of Mars. And so I think if we ever want to find them, we're going to have to get there with some giant drills and basically start drilling down into the subsurface and tap into some of those places where life might be.
And then there's Europa, which is basically just has tons of water on it.
Yeah, a boatload of water, more so than Earth. And so Europa is one of the very first moons discovered outside of our own. In 1609, Galileo was pointing his very early telescope, which, if you look through an old Galileo-style telescope now, it doesn't show you that much, but he did so much amazing astronomy with it. And in 1609, he started looking at Jupiter, and he noticed these 4 points of light moving around Jupiter, and it turns out he was the first person to see moons beyond our own moon, because you can't see any others with the naked eye. You need a telescope. And so of those 4 moons, Io, Ganymede, Callisto, and Europa, Europa is the one we've mostly been targeting so far for astrobiology. It's a pretty large moon, about the same size as our own moon, and has a thick, icy crust that some of our estimates are anything from 1 to 40 kilometers. A lot of us have kind of settled into this 10-kilometer thick, icy crust, which is 6.2 miles. But down below that is maybe something like 100 to 120 kilometers of liquid water, of salty liquid ocean water. And even though Europa is way smaller than the Earth, our oceans really aren't that deep. And so if you took all of the water from all of Europa's liquid ocean and pulled it out and made a sphere out of it, and people have shown this as an infographic, you can see that compared to the sphere of water from all of our oceans and rivers and lakes, that Europa has way more water in its ocean.
Where are you most optimistic we would find life first?
As much as I love solar system exploration, I think Venus early on in the solar system may have been a good candidate for living things. Mars is very intriguing for me, even though I'd rather send people there soon and start, exploring Mars as humans. Europa and Enceladus are really interesting targets. Saying all that, and even though it's been my own experience and research has been more tied to things like Mars and Europa, I really think the exoplanets are where it's at right now. We're finding so many of them. We now have the James Webb Space Telescope, which is allowing us to like peer through their atmospheres and see signs of chemistry. When those worlds go around their stars and they pass in between the star and us, even though they're tens or hundreds or 1,000 light years away, a little bit of that starlight passing through the atmosphere of that world comes to us, and we can tell just by the little ways that light interacts with the chemistry, with the molecules in the atmosphere, what molecules are there.
Wow.
And so we can measure things like water and carbon dioxide, and now we're seeing some other possible signs of things that have been argued, not all of us agree about, but there are some possible signs of what we call biosignatures, signs of life. I personally don't think those are really sufficient enough yet to be called signs of life, but there are some really interesting things happening with exoplanets. And if things go well with funding and with government support in the future, we may soon have the next evolution of this happening. There's a Habitable Worlds Observatory, or HabWorlds telescope, that's currently in its conceptual and developmental phase. But that would be like the next successor of a really high-end next-generation telescope built primarily to look for signs of life in these worlds far away.
This podcast is brought to you by B Micro, organic freeze-dried microgreens for easy, natural nutrition. Sprinkle them on any meal and enjoy the benefits. Shop now at bmicro.farm and use code STEVE15 to save.
What's an exoplanet?
Great question. An exoplanet or an extrasolar planet is a world orbiting any other star besides our own. And so we use it just to say any planets out there around other stars.
Okay. Oh, any popular examples of that? Any exoplanets people might already know?
So the naming is kind of silly. So a lot of the naming comes from what telescope we use to find them. So one that was in the press recently, folks might have heard of, was K2-18b. It's called that because it was discovered with a K2 mission, which is the second iteration of the Kepler Space Telescopes. We call it K2.
That's good marketing, right?
And then we
there.
have these designations after it, yeah. And so that happens a lot in astronomy. It's been the kind of like this push and pull of like, how do we name things in space? And so far, there's not really like an official designation of like a given name based on our mythologies or our practices in the past, which we do for a lot of other things in space. For various planets, we have various sources of names that we draw upon. We've done this historically for a long time. For giving names to things like craters on the moon or the moons of Jupiter or the moons of Saturn, things like that. But for exoplanets, there's not really been a consistent naming structure so far given to exoplanets yet.
What about where you, for your birthday, you can buy like a star? People used to gift that to each other.
Oh yeah, I remember like back in the
Is that legit?
The late 90s, people would like sell plots of land on the moon, and it was a complete farce. You don't own the moon. You can't own the moon, you can't own Mars, and you can't own other stars or other planets. So many years ago, the UN signed this basically agreement about how we're going to use outer space together. Many nations on the planet have signed off on it, and it's been part of our space law for a long time. Basically says no single individual, private company, or government can own anything beyond they're sending something into space. They own the rocket or satellite or whatever, but they can't own the moon. They can't own Mars. That might change in the future depending on what happens with our civilization and where we get to. But as of right now, if someone tries to sell you an exoplanet, it's cute to have a little certificate saying you own K2-18b, perhaps, but you don't actually own it.
So with the moon, what type of activity are we doing with our moon right now?
Gosh, yeah. So our moon is the most studied other body outside of our own planet when it comes to science, because our ancestors long ago they would look up and see the moon. They had a lot of stories for what the moon was, and stories that connected their lives and their history and their spiritual practices and their moral practices to what the moon was doing. The moon ties into our biology greatly. The cycles of the moon every 28 days tie into a lot of cycles for life on Earth, for humans as well as for other creatures. And so we have a lot of reason to want to study the moon more. We know now that the moon likely formed roughly 100 million years or so after the Earth formed. There's this thing we call the moon-forming event, where a world roughly the size of Mars, we sometimes call Theia, crashed into our planet, kind of doing a glancing blow. And in the process, a lot of the heavier core material of this world sank down into Earth's core. Earth is the densest planet in our solar system. And a reason for that is this moon-forming event. A lot of the heavy metal, the heavy material from this ancient world that crashed into us sank into our core and joined our core.
Whoa.
Whereas lighter material blew off the surface and then reaccreted to get together and made our moon. So our moon is actually very, very light because it doesn't have all that extra core material that it would have had otherwise.
How much water is out there in the galaxy?
Oh my gosh, so much.
And I don't even know what to call things. The galaxy, the universe, the...
I mean, so you get bigger and bigger the bigger you go. Like, the universe is everything. It's the cosmos. It's all of creation, all that we understand. Inside of that are galaxies, which themselves have a lot of structure. A colleague of mine, Mark Nyrink, has some really cool thoughts about how we can perceive the cosmic web, we call it, at the largest scales. The way that the filaments of galaxies all start to come together would remind you of like a leaf's dendritic pattern, or like a mycelial network from fungi, or a river network here on Earth. But we can go in smaller and smaller too from that. So inside of our own galaxy, in the Milky Way, are various star systems. Our solar system is just one of those many, many star systems. And then we have lots and lots of worlds that we can explore as well. Now, when it comes to water, one of my biggest pet peeves in science fiction. So there's a lot of sci-fi movies they've made, especially like in the 90s to early 2000s, where like aliens who want to come to Earth and invade us, the reason they come is for our water as a resource, which is really, really silly scientifically. Because even though we have an ocean of liquid water, we don't actually have that much water on Earth. Earth is mostly rock. The same thing, all of our terrestrial planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, are mostly rocky balls floating in the void. Earth just happens to have a little bit of water at the surface. But, like worlds like Europa that has, more ocean water than our entire planet does. Enceladus has water, but it's not just liquid water. Also, like, there's water ice. So the entire shell of Europa is water ice. Ganymede, the largest moon of our solar system, is covered in water ice. And if you go out in the outer solar system, you have all these comets and things. You have Pluto, giant ice balls. And so if aliens were going to come here and start taking our water, they'd probably start in the outer parts of the solar system first and then move their way in as they started consuming everything. The Earth would probably be like last on their list, really.
That's good news.
They'd have no reason to come here. I mean, and that would give us a chance to at least see them doing something first.
How do you think water got to Earth?
Yeah, so there's been a really fun scientific debate for a long time was water locked into the minerals that formed our planet when it first accreted together. So in this giant disk of gas and dust that was forming around the very young sun, as our planets started coming together, these materials started building up, and gravity pulled more material together and started to coalesce. That's how we get the planets themselves. Worlds like Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, they formed a lot closer into the sun, where it was really high temperature inside of the disk. So the disk is very hot inside. So hot that it melts a lot of things, and things like water and ammonia and methane, we call those volatiles. A lot of those couldn't actually physically turn into solid materials because it was so high temperature. They instead would get sucked up in the outer solar system by things like Jupiter and Saturn, Uranus and Neptune, or they'd make comets. But there is this idea, like, were there minerals that had water locked to it that formed the Earth and then allowed slowly in the early evolution of our planet for oceans to form, in which case oceans might not have formed right away. It might have been a long time before oceans started happening on the surface. The other idea is that maybe a lot of that water came from what we call exogenous delivery. So comets and other worlds like coming crashing into our planet. In the early solar system, it would have been far more chaotic. There were probably a lot more planets, a lot more worlds that were slowly being beat by the forces of gravity to come into these more stable orbits we have now. In the early solar system, we think both Jupiter and Saturn migrated a good bit. And in that process, they might have kicked out other planets. They might have kicked a lot of things around. And so our Earth was highly bombarded by a lot of materials. And still, there's a really good question. We don't actually know if the water came from the early formation or was delivered over time.
How perfectly aligned is the Earth in relation to the sun and the other planets to be able to sustain life?
Oh my gosh, it's incredible. Two scientists, Peter Ward and Don Brownlee, many years ago, I think this is back in the early 90s, I want to say, they published a book together called The Rare Earth Hypothesis, or Rare Earth. And this idea, this hypothesis, is that maybe life as we know it is actually exceedingly rare in the universe based on a few of the properties of our world. So our Earth is actually in a fairly circular orbit around the sun. It is an ellipse, but it's a fairly circular ellipse. Whereas if it was too much more, we'd have a lot more heating and cooling due to our distance from the sun. We don't have that. The reason that for the seasons is actually the axial tilt of our planet. It has nothing to do with how close we are to the sun. Sometimes that gets shared across social media and goes viral for a little bit, and then science communicators like myself have to come in and say, no, there's actually very little change in our distance from the sun, and we actually, in the northern hemisphere of the planet, in our summer, are actually further from the sun in our orbit than we are in the wintertime. So it's not distance from the sun that causes the temperature changes in our planet. Seasons happen because of that axial tilt. But one reason that axial tilt stays fairly consistent and our Earth isn't wobbling back and forth and falling to its side is our moon. So that moon forming event helped us to get locked into a nice, consistent axial tilt for a long time. The moon itself gives us tides. In the early era of the moon, when it first formed, tides were likely humongous, like tsunami waves. And then the moon itself had like a 4-hour, the Earth's period was about 4 hours of spinning, so our days were very short. The moon has since slowly been moving further and further away from us, and so our tides have gotten a little bit less. And our day has slowly gotten longer and longer over eons. But there are other reasons, too, for thinking our Earth is special. We have a giant world like Jupiter. Sometimes Jupiter kicks materials towards our planet, like comets or asteroids. But generally, it's kind of agreed upon that dynamically Jupiter has protected us from a lot of objects that could have come swinging into the inner solar system, have struck the Earth and caused the demise of life. But we have had some impacts from space, and in some cases, they've allowed evolution to be driven forward and have changed a lot of things on our planet. And so also we have oceans. Because of that little bit of liquid water we have at the surface and this atmosphere we have, it's provided a place for life to evolve over time. And we have plate tectonics. So having these plates of material that geologically roll around the planet, sometimes getting subducted and going back down into the planet as one plate overrides another, it allows for recycling of our materials and has helped to stabilize our temperature as a planet. Now, all of that said, and there's other arguments that this book and others have proposed for why Earth might be very rare, there are some of us who wonder if there's worlds entirely unlike the Earth out there where there could be other kinds of life. So we really don't know what life takes to originate and evolve. It might be possible that life is in all kinds of other worlds, like the gas giants out there in the cosmos might be full of life. Maybe the icy moons are replete with life in their oceans out there. Maybe worlds more like Venus and or Mars, are more common. There's a lot of possibility out there for different kinds of worlds where life could happen.
Thoughts on water being a life form?
So I would never think of water as a life form itself because it doesn't produce the processes of life as we know it. But I can say, like in astrobiology, one of the fun things I like to remind people is that we have a good feeling of what life does, but we don't really know what life is. Similarly, for intelligence, we have some kind of idea of what intelligence does to a degree, but we don't really know what intelligence is. And it gets even worse for consciousness. We barely know what consciousness does, and we don't really know what consciousness is. And so there's a lot of possibility out there in the universe for different kinds of things to portray what we see as life, which is really a process happening. And so it makes me think a lot about different kinds of creatures that might be out there in the universe and how they might have information storage over time, how they might transmit information from generation to generation, how they might have functions like metabolism to drive energetic reactions, whether or not they have cellular structures. It's not a guarantee. A lot of people think it might be necessary to have cells, but we don't know for sure. Maybe there's life forms out there that have figured out how to produce life without cells. And so there's a lot of possibility for life in the universe.
Why do you think so many sci-fi movies show aliens as these gray creatures with huge heads and no genitals? And why do you think that's a popular way of describing aliens?
There are various reasons for that. A really good book that just came out is The Martians, written by David Barron, who lives in Boulder, Colorado. David explores that period of time in the late 1800s and very early 1900s when it was just like common knowledge amongst especially like the elite in Boston and the other places in the country where people just knew that Mars had people. Like Mars had people living there. And a lot of times if they threw a party and they had the Martians visit, it would be somebody basically wearing a suit. It'd be a human in a suit that had some various features that looked a little alien. And so maybe it's not surprising that then as this interest in alien life and kind of like, intelligent alien life was taking off, after H.G. Wells wrote The War of the Worlds in 1897, it kind of launched this alien invasion sci-fi, and we started having, more storytelling that included this idea of like aliens visiting us or us going out and visiting aliens in early film and things like that. And so maybe it's not surprising that our very first constructs of what an alien should look like would be very human looking. And so that probably fed into a lot of the cultural ideas over time of, if you had an experience, what would you consciously imagine or see in the experience as being an alien? And so maybe it's not surprising they often have two eyes, maybe bigger eyes, maybe they have long, slender limbs, but usually two arms, two legs, two nostrils. They often mimic humanoid form a lot. So much so that it's kind of questionable, because evolution could possibly follow some of those same directions that have led to us and other primates, but there's no guarantee out there in the universe. And if anything, it seems like all the myriad steps it took to get to us, there's just so much other ways evolution could have gone in our own planet's history, let alone a different world with different chemistry and different physical processes. And so I will say, like, there are convergent processes in evolution, and one of my favorite is trees. We can talk about why trees are so epically awesome, and I think alien trees probably exist. But convergence in evolution, people think a lot about flight. So insects, birds, and bats, they all learned how to fly. They evolved flight separately. So there's no direct lineage of flight that gave us all three of those. Instead, these three different groups formed, and then flight happened. And so it makes sense that there should be alien flight as well, that aliens might figure out some form of wing structure or other processes that allow them to get up into their atmospheres. And so there's convergent processes that do lead to similar form and function. And so maybe there will be like humanoid style-ish creatures out there that have two arms and two legs. It's possible. I don't think it's probable, though.
Would love to get into trees. I read a fun fact in preparation for this, and that's that sharks are 100 million years older than trees. So like all life came from the oceans and then kind of crawled out of the ocean and onto land. Is that how you understand it?
We don't really know. And that's one thing I love about science, is you just get to say, I don't know sometimes about things, and we don't know where life started on Earth. And anyone who says we do, they're wrong, because even though a lot of people agree that life probably started in the ocean, there have been some good arguments recently. Bruce Damer and Dave Deamer, both wonderful scientists and good people, they put out a paper they called the hot spring hypothesis. They've argued that the dilution of the water in the ocean was just so much that the chemistry required to bring life together and encapsulate processes to create enough of the chemistry to allow other things to happen was unlikely in the ocean. They've argued that you needed like wetting and drying cycles on the surface of the land, probably close to the ocean, but maybe more like around like hydrothermal vents geothermal springs on the surface, and things like geysers and that kind of stuff. So you think like Yellowstone or Rotorua in New Zealand, like those kind of places are kind of how they're envisioning more of a system for life to start. But that said, life could have started in the oceans, and we do know that the evolution of life does appear to mostly have happened primarily in the oceans for much of life's history. For most of the history of life on Earth, which started, we can say almost for sure, 3.5 billion years. Some even have good evidence for 3.8 billion years. Some of us think probably at least around 4 billion years even life could have been here. Through most of the time since then, it was mostly microbes doing microbial things, and there were a lot of changes over time, a lot of evolution occurring, a lot of processes happening. Some of the molecules that we have in our bodies that we find in plants and fungi were developing billions of years ago in these early ancestors of ours, that so then from them came these other creatures that slowly over time became us. But yeah, sharks have been around for a very long time. Most animals came around during the Cambrian radiation, or some call it the Cambrian explosion. It wasn't really an explosion. It was a process of the evolution kind of spurring greater things happening. But yeah, the vascularization of plants, developing separate tissues where they could transport water and nutrients from one place to another. And the reason I don't say trees is that there was a lot of steps before we get to trees. And vascularization was a really important part. And so we know that at some point, and we have some evidence for when this happened, around the mid-Devonian or so, I think it is, or actually before that, maybe 500 million years ago, mosses came to land. So we call them bryophytes. They're these creatures that they reproduce via spores. They don't have like a large root system. Those were the first things kind of coming to land and then spreading all across the land. And then sometime shortly thereafter, tens of millions of years later, plants evolved vascularization, which allowed them to not only build root structures, but to then move nutrients and water to different places. And so it gave them the chance to start adapting to other environments, other ecosystems, to start filling all the ecosystems of the land. And then eventually, life came out of the ocean, or animals came out of the ocean as well, and started, enjoying their life on land with the plants. And then, very early on, plants and animals, fungi, like we were all connected. And so a lot of those early evolutionary changes were happening because plants were being eaten by other creatures. And then those other creatures were also co-evolving with the plants as well. And so now you look across the planet, there's great biodiversity, and a lot of it's driven by these co-evolutionary mechanisms we've had evolving with plants and other organisms through time.
What plant do you think we have the longest relationship with?
Oh my gosh, that's a really fun question.
Like what plant have we been co-evolving with the most, which
Yeah.
for the longest? Who do we've got the deepest?
I mean, if we're talking we like humans, I'm not really sure because we've cultivated so many different plants for food through time. And so our ancestors long ago, hunting and gathering, what kinds of plants were they gathering? Most likely things like berries, easily edible leaves, things like that. Very early on, they probably found psychedelics. And then at some point, we learned how to start growing intentionally, how to have agriculture and grow some plants. And so things like wheat became very important and have co-evolved with us for a very long time. More recently, we've used, these long processes of breeding to create strawberries and cauliflower and broccoli and all these things that we're born from different plants that we kind of slowly selected for different traits. But if we're talking as like animals in general, I'm not actually sure like how far back we have to go to start seeing where those connections are happening. And again, like we have various molecules in our bodies as animals and our bodies as humans that have been with biology since long before there were plants or animals or fungi.
I'm thinking of the hemp plant because we've had 10, maybe 20,000 year relationship with that plant, and we've developed a whole endocannabinoid system. It's a food, it's a medicine, it's a textile. There's so many benefits that we receive from the plant. That's the one that comes to mind for me.
It's pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the purpose of humans are on Earth?
Oh man, what is the meaning of life? Like, why are we
A
here?
little bit. I mean, what's coming up for me is in some ways, I think we're here to help protect and spread life.
Mm-hmm.
And we're the only ones that could build rockets to send ourselves out there or to deflect things coming in.
Yeah, so far. We don't know what would happen had the dinosaurs not met their demise 66 million years ago. Could some other creature besides a mammal have been the one to figure it out? Ancient dinosaurs are very much like birds. So these giant land birds, what were they like? Would they eventually have evolved? Technologies to allow them to do other things? We don't know. Or was there something about those early mammals that eventually led to us that kind of brought that value to us? Some have argued that our oldest technology is language. So that the development of language allowed us to start going beyond kind of where our ancestors had been at, where there wasn't a way to share knowledge and to envision a future together and until we had language to start doing that with. But as far as our purpose, if we're thinking of humans as like spreading technology, there's this idea of like the technosphere. So it's the sphere of all of the technology around our biosphere. And those technologies can include a lot of things created by other organisms, but they also include all of the technologies we've created, all the things we've encoded in writing in our libraries, all the Shakespeare, all the Lady Gaga songs and Taylor Swift songs. It's all of our cars and buses and skyscrapers. It's all of our smartphones. It's everything that we've built technologically that have helped us in some ways and other ways have harmed some of us sometimes. But we have this sphere of technology that's exponentially growing all the time around our planet. And so some people wonder, should we be looking for those kinds of technologies when looking for aliens out there? Instead of just looking for signs of life, should we look for others like us who are creating these technologies that are visible?
There's conspiracy that aliens have crashed into Earth or given us technology that we've reverse engineered, and that's like fiber optics and microchips and things like that. Do you see any truth in anything there?
Not really. I think it's an interesting idea and has made for great science fiction. And I think mostly it's been government deflection from secret operations to develop new warfare, new war-fighting machines, for instance. If you look around the world at places where they have the most observations of what we call UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, or basically what we used to call UFOs. We have a larger category for it now, and some of us really do want to study these things scientifically. But I think a lot of like the reports of seeing things, if you look at them, they're mostly happening in places where the sky is dark at night and it's very close to military bases. And so that by itself starts to suggest people aren't really seeing aliens, they're seeing military craft being tested. We have lots of test pilots. We have a lot of reason to build, higher end machines for warfare, like it or not. And so I don't really see any evidence to support the idea, especially when it comes to things like technologies. Like some of the people who really believe in like the ancient aliens idea, it's really a fun thing to think about. Like, did aliens visit ancient humans? And I think the bigger question then is, did aliens visit the ancient Earth? Arthur C. Clarke wrote The Sentinel in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where he has this idea that maybe aliens were part of our evolution at some point, maybe not directly, but used some technology to spur us on. I don't think there's any evidence to support that, but it is a fun idea to explore. It's a fun hypothesis. I feel the same way, like with some of these ideas of like the technologies we have now being developed because of alien technology. I feel like if we saw alien technologies, especially from such advanced beings that they can traverse space and time with advanced propulsion and advanced techniques for surviving the space environment, then most likely the technologies we'd be spinning off aren't things that we can follow a direct path in our own history of where we developed those things from. It would be some humongous jump in technology. So if we had a crashed craft, most likely it would help us to make some big leap in technology, and we've never really seen that. All of these technologies that we're talking about, from computer technologies and fiber optics and nanochips and all this, there is a path. We can easily chart out that path and see its history from the earliest computers filling giant rooms, and having these ticker tape things feeding into them and coming back out again, and using giant old glass fuses, and before we had transistors and things like that. Up until the modern day with our smartphones, with our crazy power inside of them for computation, there's a direct trajectory of that happening.
So with ancient aliens, you don't see any evidence of us being visited, getting seeded with any type of DNA upgrade or anything like that?
Yeah, not at all. So we can look at all of our primate ancestors and other modern primates, and we all share almost all the same DNA. There's no alien DNA anywhere that we found ever. Every now and then, like a paper gets published by some various authors claiming something like the octopus is an alien and has alien DNA, which is entirely untrue. Aliens don't contain any DNA that isn't also elsewhere on the planet. We do have variations in our genes, and so those of us who are very closely related, like ourselves and modern apes and our ancestral primates, we share almost all the same DNA. There's only some slight variations in our genes that allows us to be this different.
What do you think was going on with ancient civilizations all building pyramids all around the world? It doesn't seem like they were communicating with each other, and yet they all decided to spend, insane effort to construct these.
Yeah, it's a fun question. I think there's a couple of good answers. The first and obvious one you hear the most is that a pyramid, or a structure with a wide base and a very narrow top, is technologically the easiest to build, and it's the most sound. It's not going to fall over. If they had built an upside down pyramid with a very, very skinny bottom and a humongous base weighing thousands or 1,000,000 pounds, and had figured out how to stabilize that would have been really impressive. That would be. I would wonder how they figured out how to do that. But building a pyramid is pretty easy. And if you watch like children at the beach playing in the sand, one of the first things they're going to start building is a mound. And so it seems like a fairly straight shot, like going into these structures of building mounds, step pyramids, and then eventually getting these smooth side pyramids. And different cultures, they are similar, but there are variations across different cultures through history. And so it seems like it's more just the building process that was, an easiest thing for our ancestors to have done. But then we also have the transmission of knowledge across our planet. There are things that have been transmitted through time across our planet. So some of the most ancient symbols humans have drawn in various places that we see archaeologically are all over the world. And so it suggests to a lot of us that some of those symbols came out of Africa with our ancestors long ago, and then slowly those symbols changed very much over time. And some of those symbols, like a circle with a cross through it, is a very common ancient symbol, often representing like home. X marks the spot. This is where we are. This is Earth. That same symbol has gone all around the world, and so it most likely was with our ancestors very, very long ago, before they started making their way through Asia and then going down into what become the Aboriginal tribes in Australia, and then moving over into North America and South America. And so some of these things, I think, actually came with us. And so there's technology, there's language sharing and storytelling that would be transmitted through peoples migrating around the planet. Also, then intermixing with that are these very straightforward approaches to building.
And it boggles my mind why these civilizations would put so much effort into building, even if they're easier to build structures. Like, it's the amount of effort that they're putting into it is just unbelievable.
I mean, I imagine they would think the same of us if they came today and they saw like the giant sphere in Las Vegas, or they went to Dubai and they saw the Burj Khalifa, these giant skyscrapers. They would wonder, like, why are we making these monuments to the heavens in honor of ourselves? They would wonder, how could we build something so tall? Obviously, humans can't do that. How could they build something with video on it showing all these crazy patterns and structures? And so I imagine they would think the same thing of us if they saw us building. And I think for our ancestors, we've always had these stories of trying to understand our place in the world, in the cosmos, connecting ourselves to the heavens. A lot of our ancient storytelling mythologies, they come from these ideas of finding human connection to the gods, to what is bigger than us, to metaphysics. And so I think a lot of our earliest constructions like that in these civilizations, which oftentimes are being led by a person or a group who see themselves as being slightly closer to divinity. And so you have the pharaohs and emperors of ancient civilizations building these as monuments to themselves, more so than monuments to the gods in many cases. And so you can see how they would want to build giant structures to honor themselves, and then also compete with other people to build giant structures to honor themselves. And so it's just a fact of the nature of our lives that all of those dreams were still fleeting. They all eventually succumbed to mortality, and then their offspring led out to more coming, and eventually led to us. And so our ancestors, they had a lot of shared beliefs and dreams that we do, but I don't see any necessarily like a need for aliens to explain anything that they did.
Do people just want to talk to you about aliens all the time?
Of course. Yeah, and I like going on about aliens all day, and I should say, like, I don't have all the answers. I love saying I don't know.
Yeah.
I've read a lot and learned a lot and have met a lot of people who have beliefs about aliens in different directions and different ideas. I don't know everything, and I'm always willing to consider if there's good evidence. If someone really puts forward good evidence someday that a UAP really is an alien craft or a transdimensional human being visiting us from some other time or place, I'm more than willing to consider those data. I've never yet seen any sufficient, compelling evidence to the contrary.
What about aliens in other dimensions?
Yeah.
So I don't know how many dimensions there are. Maybe there's like 12, and we live in the third dimension.
Fourth, yeah.
Or fourth dimension.
Yeah. We
Sometimes in the third.
Time to a degree.
Okay.
So we're living in the present. Like right now as we speak, we're in a present moment, but we can't stop in the 3D. And so our brains, our bodies, we can't just stop and have an experience in just 3 dimensions. We have to have an experience in 4. So that the time component, we can never just stop it in one place and be there. As much as those of us who meditate and love practices of presence and mindfulness, we want to be in the moment and experience that moment for what it truly is. Time is still passing around us, and that's what gives us experience. And so we look to the past for our experience, and we're openly going into the future and experiencing our future every single moment that passes by. And so a question that many of us have come upon is, if there are higher dimensions in the cosmos, and that's quite possible, there's the idea of like string theory that uses a whole lot of dimensions to try to explain the structure of the universe. It's fallen in popularity a little bit more in the last 20 years or so, but still is a very intriguing idea cosmologically. But there's these ideas that there could be other dimensions, and what if aliens are experiencing other dimensions? And I find all that wild and fun to think about. But one that I'd love to come back to with a lot of people often is, what if aliens are experiencing our 4 dimensions way differently? So scales of time and space, they might have much different perceptions of what those things mean. They might experience time in a much different way than we do. This thing that feels like it's a motion through some kind of dimension that takes us from a past to a future. If this is a real thing, which there's actually good physical arguments that time might not be a real thing, which is kind of crazy to think about. But if aliens are experiencing time, maybe they have a much different experience of it. Maybe their moments are much bigger. And so maybe they're experiencing a lot more in a single moment, or maybe their moments are much smaller. And so maybe they're experiencing the passage of time way differently. Maybe for them, maybe they live 1,000 years or 10,000 years, or they're immortal beings. Maybe their view of change through time is so different because of how they evolved in their biology and their world. Maybe their experiential understanding of what it means to have a moment in time is way different than ours. If that's the case, we have to ask ourselves, like, how will we ever communicate about what we know about the universe if they have a much different perception of time? And then also space. They might have a different concept of what space is, these 3 dimensions of space, and the XYZ coordinates that give us a 3D structure. They might have a different kind of view of what that structure is like and how they experience the reality of that structure. It could be different, and that's kind of wild to think about. And so we don't even need multidimensional beings way beyond ours to really start getting wacky and have some fun with it. We can have fun just thinking about the sheer observance of time.
How do you think we would try to communicate with the first alien?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've used in science fiction and science for a long time. A lot of people have said, we'll use math. Math must be like the language of the universe. As my friend Sarah Walker has said before, math is not the language with which, math is not the language of the universe. Math is the language with which we understand the universe. And so we use math to understand through our own physics and our own science and our own perception how the universe works. And even though there should be some consistencies, we imagine if aliens have a much different physics, there's a chance that their math might have come out a little bit differently too, how they use math. Basic things like 1 + 1 = 2, that's probably going to be fairly similar, but there are other things that could happen mathematically that we're not envisioning for us, and that we might be doing things mathematically and scientifically that they're not envisioning either. And so, we should always ask ourselves, like, will aliens have a knowledge of physics, a knowledge of science the way we do, a knowledge of math the way we do? Maybe we're wrong in presuming that it'll be math as the language we'll be using. Maybe it'll be something different, like a conscious connection. Maybe we'll actually have to have some kind of deeper, conscious, spiritual existence, like merged or shared with an alien being to actually communicate with them in any sufficient way. It's quite possible that that's the step we would actually have to figure out together. And maybe right now what we're doing with kind of this resurgence of psychedelics in our society is one way of learning how to do that and kind of having a connection to what some could argue is intelligence and consciousness and things like mushrooms and plants. But we also could see it perhaps in AI. Right now, these large language models have a lot of people wondering, are we going to make sufficiently advanced AI models that approach what we call AGI, or this general intelligence, this artificial general intelligence? If that happens, will there be a place where they gain consciousness, they gain sentience in some way, and where we lose the real ability to have a written dialogue like we do with ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, and instead we need to have an actual conscious experience with what this thing is?
What's your opinion on AI, where it's at today and where it's going?
Admittedly, so that there are some people who people throw around a lot of terms out there. People have called me like a doomer and things like that, a regressivist and all kinds of things. I signed a letter written by Max Tegmark and some others a couple of years ago now, arguing that some of these AI companies should take a break, take a little pause in time on advancing these AI models much further until a lot of us who have backgrounds in science and philosophy and technology have a chance collectively as humanity as a whole, through governments and institutions, to really talk about, like, what are the ethics here? What are our moral obligations to humans? What are our moral obligations to our biosphere and our planet? And what are our moral obligations to the AI itself as we develop it? Should we encode any kind of moral philosophy in AI? There's a lot of good that could lead to, or a lot of threat that could lead to as well. If it, anything can kind of go haywire there. And so even though I did sign that letter arguing for that pause, I also have seen a lot of promise coming from these new technologies. AI is changing a lot of things. When it comes to people who are creatives out there, I feel really bad for artists and writers and those who've had their work basically fed into these AI models, and then these models are spitting out, they basically repeating, regurgitating what humans have created. And a lot of that comes from our imagination and our character and our culture and our philosophy and our love and and our hearts. Like we put a lot of ourselves into our creative works, and then you have these AI just like replicating it, and just feeding it over and over. And now, AI, with ChatGPT and Claude and these things, they've pumped out trillions of images, trillions of pieces of text now. People are using it left and right, especially younger people are really buying into it. They're using it a lot. I use AI a lot for a lot of my work because it streamlines a lot of things. But I feel bad because, we humans for the longest time have felt like, when we create something, it's not necessarily ours. We love to give our creation to the world and give it its own life. Like an artist who creates a great song or a great painting, puts that out in the world. And the way it impacts other human beings in their own experience can be way different than what the creator originally envisioned. We see that a lot in songs and a lot in artwork where, the work is put out there and then other humans can view or hear or see that work in some way, and it can touch them. It can give us a really deep human connection. The same thing as reading books. When you read a book that was written 1,000 years ago or a century ago, you're literally connecting to another human being or a group of human beings with their ideas, and your ideas are being influenced by these ideas from our ancestors from long ago through going to the library. And so now with AI just pumping out so much information, I do worry, like we're going to have a really important conversation as a society about what intellectual property is, about what being a creative really means, and about the concept of copyright, about the concept of owning anything anymore when it comes to knowledge. AI is going to force us to have a new conversation.
What's your boundary with AI?
Boundary is a good question. The way I use it myself, I use it as a co-writer, often for like brainstorming my writing. And I avoid having it write everything and then publishing that because it's often a terrible writer for one thing, and it doesn't have my voice either. I want to create writing that's me, but I love using it as a co-writer, especially to ask it questions about my writing where it can help me find some good sources or do like a various research and the things I want to explore for an idea that I have in my head. It's very good at helping me find like brainstorming ideas to bring out, things like that. When it comes to like image generation, I think it's great for image generation. I do think that we should be really careful in telling it to generate an image as a certain artist or person without that person's permission. The Studio Ghibli imagery that came out fairly recently online and caused a lot of issues because people were creating all these images, and then the original creators were like, we don't support this. We don't want that. We don't want you recreating our imagery. And again, I think we're at the place where if it's out there in the world, AI can feed into it now. And now that AI is agential in some ways, and many AI systems can go into the internet and scour the depth of human knowledge we have out there, they can basically recreate everything now. And so it's not just the training sets that we used to create their capability for that. They're now training and retraining themselves on all the breadth of human knowledge that we can find online.
What do you think is going to happen to like the human psyche, drive, soul as we just merge more with AI?
Yeah. There's some people who worry about, the Skynet scenario from Terminator that, AI will become AGI and then it might think that the best way to help humans is just to eradicate us and get rid of us. It might not really know what it's doing. It might be programmed in a way, like say, right now our world governments are certainly developing AI systems for military applications. We all have to admit that to ourselves, even if we don't read about it in the news and we're not learning what they are. It's every new technology gets used by the military in some way.
And that's probably why no one's slowing down, is because that is the main driver.
Absolutely, yeah. It's part of why we have Space Force, too. As other nations have started getting more into launching humans into space, the U.S. also wanted to have a militaristic presence in space. And so, we have these like tit-for-tat scenarios that happen in evolution for the evolution of hummingbirds and the plants they feed on. The same way we have this tit-for-tat in the evolution of technologies when you have competition between nations that have military interests in that kind of way. And so I have my worries as well for what could happen if AI runs amok and isn't under any kind of control, especially if AI is granted or gives itself access to processes of automation that, for instance, create robots or create new machines or give it ways to manipulate the physical world. Because right now, like a ChatGPT right now, it lives in servers and on machines. It lives in a digital space. It doesn't have a physical occupation in the world yet, but there are companies right now that are building humanoid robots and other robots and putting these large language models into them already. And so this automation of robots is coming very soon. I think a lot of people are unaware of how soon it's coming. Mm-hmm. And it's going to start changing a lot of things radically in our society. And so there are fears that it could just take off if not checked in some way. But I have hope for humans. Again, I think a reason we're seeing a resurgence in not just the use of psychedelics, but exploring psychedelics as a means of conscious connection and awareness. I think we're seeing a new growth in people yearning for a depth of spirituality, a depth of their being, even if they don't know exactly how to find it. I think it's sadly one reason why people take to social media so much these days and to the internet is that they're looking for a connection. And the internet, these social media companies know well how to use someone's search for connection to just drive those dopamine hits and the addiction of it to get more ad revenue, more clicks, more reels passing by your face. But I think we are all searching to a degree for that kind of connection that we want. And there is a hope that we might find some connection through more of a merger with AI if we can use the technology in an ethical and responsible way.
With psychedelics, do you think that is something that just evolved on our planet, or was it gifted to us, brought here? What's its purpose?
I've never entertained a hypothesis that psychedelics were brought here. Again, like it is interesting to think back through time of what was happening on our planet. Did aliens ever come and visit and do something? I don't know the answer to that. I don't see sufficient reason to argue that when we look at all of the biology on Earth and our connections to each other. And again, like there's a lot of molecules that life as we know it came upon very early on in the history of life that then through evolution, through time, we still use those same molecules, but maybe we've made some variations in those molecules that have allowed for this huge range of organic compounds on Earth, some of which impact us. Our neurotransmitters, a lot of those are found in other creatures like plants and fungi and various microbes and things like that. And in many cases, they're not used for neurotransmitters because those other creatures don't have a neurological system. They don't need them for that. But they're using them in other ways, sometimes to fight the decay caused by breathing oxygen, which is actually a very powerful molecule for breaking down others. And so it's kind of crazy on Earth. We ever figured out using oxygen. But as far as psychedelics, the history of psychedelics has been with humans for a very long time. And there's the old, the stoned ape hypothesis, that maybe part of what led us to this revolution of spirit, of language, of creativity was our ancestors coming upon plants and fungi and devouring of them and discovering this connection they could have through a psychedelic experience. And so I'm kind of glad we're seeing a resurgence and a rebirth now. Where we had that period kind of the 60s and 70s where you had the flower power kind of movement, and we had this hippie movement that kind of brought a lot more of that into the limelight in the U.S. and other Western cultures. But now I think people are starting to realize like the depth that our ancestors and indigenous peoples have had in the greater connection they found through the use of psychedelics, and in many cases for many thousands of years.
Yeah. Why do you think psychedelics live in plants?
Oh, I don't really know. I don't know if there's any reason for its evolution before having a connection with humans. A lot of these molecules probably do play other processes and certainly evolved from other molecules as well. And so it could just be that the reason for it to continuing, it's evolving along with us, is a coevolution with the plants, with the fungi, that we found a connection somewhere where it turns out the molecule isn't just something that allows us to connect with ourselves and the plant, but that we can also then give back by cultivating the plant and carrying the plant forward. And so evolution does that a lot where, something seems like there might be a parasitic kind of process happening where one creature is using the other creature, but a lot of these various mutualisms, these symbioses, are mutualistic where there's a give and take on both sides.
Some people report sitting with psychedelics and communicating with aliens, seeing aliens, having some type of seeing spaceships and seeing creatures and having just interaction. What do you think's happening there?
Yeah, so first off, I should say I never want to judge someone or deny them their experience. I think we are all having very different conscious experiences of this life. This is a thing we've been in philosophy for thousands of years, have been asking ourselves, like, are we all experiencing the same thing? Are there different ranges of experience? Now, I have seen things in the sky that I cannot explain. Lights moving in the sky in weird ways, often in places like the deserts of Utah or Nevada. But I've also had very deep experiences while in the presence of psychedelics that have, for me, it hasn't seemed like an alien consciousness. For me, I felt like it was the consciousness inside of me trying to speak to me. You find this really deep in meditation. When you practice meditation and you really experience it, even without psychedelics, some of the first transcendent almost experiences that people who practice meditation after a period of time will have, give them this experience of like realizing the voice in their head, their inner monologue is not them. You kind of feel like a stepping back or stepping away or through. You kind of have this period of transcendence where you realize that your consciousness is not that voice always talking at you. And so for me, sometimes, I've had some experiences where it feels almost like I'm stepping into another place where there's another voice there too. But for me, I've always just, felt that was my voice. It was part of the universe speaking to me through me. But it wasn't necessarily an alien consciousness or existence.
Hey, I just wanted to jump in here and give a quick shout out to the sponsor of today's podcast, B Micro, the easiest way to sneak vegetables into any meal. Due to soil depletion, GMOs, and monocropping, Americans are not getting enough nutrients. So in 2018, I founded B Micro, the first freeze-dried microgreens company in the US to help Americans get more concentrated natural nutrients into their diet. Microgreens are a phase in the plant's life when they're 14 days old and naturally the most concentrated in vitamins, minerals, nutrients, all the good things that we need. Our microgreens are grown here in the US in soil in a greenhouse. They're certified USDA organic and regenerative organic. We grow, wash, and freeze dry them to extend their 1-week shelf life to over 1 year, allowing us to ship anywhere in the US without the worry of spoilage. We have 2 flavors, broccoli, backed by over 2,000 studies on sulforaphane and its powerful detox benefits, and a blend of red cabbage, radish, and broccoli, the most potent detox formula we've tested, offering you the most bang for your buck. Easily sneak these microgreens in any meal. Eggs, smoothies, pizza, pasta, even your kids' mac and cheese, you can't even taste it. Use code STEVE15 to save at bmicro.farm.
How do you see psychedelics helping maybe yourself or our society?
Yeah, one, we are in pain. We are suffering. And as the Buddha said, there's this truism of life as we know it is suffering. And, there's various ethical frameworks that have been tried through time in our civilization of what do we want to use as a basis to create moral theory? Should it be a mythology? Should it be an idea of a god or gods and laws given to us by them, as some have said? Should it be, virtue, as Aristotle said? Should it be like finding the happy ground, the virtuous path forward? There's other ideas of, finding the most happiness for civilization, for society as a whole. But there's also this idea of decreasing suffering as much as possible. And our civilization, we are hurting right now. We are suffering. We see it across the planet and the tragedies happening right now still around our globe because of struggles for power. And, we have these struggles to amass wealth, to amass power over other human beings. It's been tied into our DNA. It's tied into our ancestry. We have these tribalistic drives. Sometimes competition can be very healthy. Sometimes those tribal feelings, it makes us feel connected to each other. But sometimes the competition gets out of hand. And we're not very good at gauging when that happens. As a society, we need to be more responsible for ourselves and to ourselves, but also for each other. And so one of the best ways to get there, in my own personal viewpoint, is to have that greater depth of connection. And for some people, we can use psychedelics to help approach this connection for each other together in a sitting or for other organisms on our planet. One thing that happens in meditation itself, there are different forms of meditation. A lot of them can kind of be viewed as kind of like this monitoring process where you're monitoring kind of what's happening, what are you feeling, what's happening in your body, and things like that. And then there's this kind of this other side of it, just kind of an open process where you're just present and you're being present in the moment. And both of them do a lot of very powerful things for us. Both of them happen as well through the use of psychedelics, especially in well-structured ceremony and meditations together. But in these processes, one thing that can happen is a reduction in autobiographical thought. So there's this realm of human thinking where we're the main star of the movie. Like we are the main character. It's all about us. Everyone else is consequential and just on the side. And I think one thing we see in narcissistic behaviors, especially unfortunately in a lot of our leaders now and through time, is a lack of that non-autobiographical, that view for other people. Meditation and psychedelic experiences, they have been shown scientifically as well as through experience reports to increase that connection, to decrease the self, and to help us feel that we are part of something bigger. There are reasons that individualism can be wonderful at times, but collectivism allows us to kind of sense the needs of our community, of our biosphere to a much greater degree. And by doing that, I think we have a much better chance of developing the empathy that we need to help each other through this time of suffering.
Is there a project that you think is going to really bring humanity together? Maybe one that's already happening?
There are various things. So as I coined the term the Panzoic effect during my TEDx Boulder talk in 2024, the idea for me was that, and I've met so many people who think about alien life, and I've some people, it's led them to some negative places, some places of doubt, or even anger at some of us who don't agree with them. And like I said, I don't deny anyone their experience, but I also don't necessarily have to agree with it myself as a reality. And sometimes that does bother people. But I've had so many beautiful human experiences connecting with people with a shared, just so many different viewpoints of what aliens could be. If it's the hopeful kind of experience of meeting aliens, if there's a fear of meeting aliens, and just all these realms of thought of thinking about aliens. In many cases, I've noticed what I think are experiences of wonder and awe happening in people when they think about planets and solar systems and alien beings and spaceships and all this stuff. And so, as I've argued, there's a lot of developing science right now in awe and what awe can do for us. And one thing that's been shown through the research is that experiences of awe, having this sense of like a depth, a vastness, when you come to these larger mysteries of the universe, those experiences of awe have been shown to promote pro-social behaviors. More empathetic behaviors, caring behaviors, wanting to help each other to be bigger and better for ourselves and for each other. And so as I've argued, I think for me the project is having a larger open conversation about aliens and what our place in the universe is. That has led me to a lot of really incredible experiences in my own sense of awe and wonder at the universe, and I think it helps a lot of people as well. There are certainly other approaches as well, though, too. So one reason I love meditation so much is that it also helps us kind of experience those moments of wonder and connection, of selflessness and openness and awe. And I think we need more of that for everyone in the entire civilization, for all of humanity. Empathy really should be what this next century holds for us if we really want to get over some of those very negative competitive behaviors.
How can someone maybe not familiar with the practice of empathy start?
Yeah, so there's a weird thing in empathy where people they talk about what is your love language when you show your love to other people, and so rarely do we talk about what is your love language to yourself. Like, how do you love yourself? How do you care about yourself? When's the last time you allowed yourself to openly interrogate your feelings and your thoughts? It's really beautiful when you meet other human beings where you feel so connected to them that you allow yourself to open up. And for a lot of people, they don't get that experience very often. They don't know how to access that experience and be there. It's why therapy can be so powerful, meditation can be so powerful, psychedelic experiences can be so very powerful, because it helps people to find the connection they need to open up with themselves first. Because you can't empathize with somebody else. You can't feel for somebody else unless you allow yourself off the hook a little bit too. You have to be willing to find some love and care for yourself and stop judging yourself so harshly before you can realize that you've been doing the same thing to other people. And one thing I think helps with aliens, when we envision aliens as being not from our biosphere, that's truly the biggest case of us versus them, or us and them in the universe is that, our entire biosphere, we're all connected, we're all together, but maybe we also have connections to aliens. How would they treat us Will they have empathy for us? How will we treat them? Will we have empathy for them? I think having that bigger picture of it can help us kind of then to start zooming down into the individual and the local community and things like that. But we need to start by allowing each other to have those moments of just let it go, just be there with yourself. The bad memories are there. We all have some bad memories, some far, far worse than others. And it's never our place to judge someone else's trauma, what they experienced and how they've processed it. But man, we could do so much more for each other if we just had a more connected space where people felt comfortable in their own way accessing it and processing it.
What does self-care look like for you?
Yeah, oh man, self-care for me it's fitness. I love working out. I always have. I've been training the martial arts for almost 40 years now, which is bizarre to think about.
Wow.
The years have been passing by. I love weightlifting. I love Pilates. I love yoga. These ways of feeling connection of the body and the mind and all the things that we are. I also love my meditation practice. I was in a very dark space for a moment in my life during graduate school, a lot of imposter syndrome and self-doubt. And I realized that two of the biggest things for me were meditation and my physical fitness. They helped me a lot. Now I'm a father, and so having that connection in my family, it kind of empowers me to want to be a better person, to do better for the world. Self-care also includes like knowing limits, like finding in yourself ways to set boundaries, not just boundaries so that other people can respect your space and the time and the work you can do and the things you can do, but also knowing how to set some places for yourself where it's like, I didn't get that one thing done, but I can put it off. It's okay because I need to now rest and recover, and then I come back to it stronger. I think in our modern society in particular, with like as Cal Newport calls it, the hyperactive hive mind happening, where like we feel the need to respond to emails immediately and Slack messages and Discord messages and social media DMs and all these things. Like we're being messaged constantly all day, but those messages are rarely like connecting. They're not engaging. It's just work. It's this idea of productivity just spinning us out of control. And I think all of us need to give ourselves a little reprieve from that.
How do plants and nature play a part in your life, your self-care?
Yeah, I mean, so plants in general have played a huge part in human society and civilization for a long time. I myself value what plants can do for us, not just as edible food stuff, but also just for the aesthetic process of being connected to them. Some years ago, myself and an artist, we worked on this project considering how we will take plants to space with us. So we've now taken a few dozen plants into space, to the International Space Station and on satellites and the space shuttle to grow them. And most of the time, most of those plant growth studies, what we were doing is thinking of like, how do we grow plants for food? How do we use them for the future? And that's we've done that for a long time with plants. We've co-evolved together doing that. But very rarely, actually only one time so far that I know of, have we grown plants just to grow them, just to let them grow in space. So on the International Space Station, we grew a flower. And so what we were thinking is, when humans go to Mars in the future, and assuming they do, and then we settle on Mars and start building habitats and things like that, besides having greenhouses full of plants that we're growing for food or that we're using for their utility, for their value, in helping us to recycle nutrients and clean up our environment and process our air, what kinds of plants, what kinds of other creatures are we going to take just for the sheer fact that they're part of us and we're going to go out and experience this together? For the aesthetic value they bring to us just in their sheer beauty, so that the flowering plants are a great example of that. They've evolved so much color and variation and size and detail through evolutionary processes to spread their pollen more. Well, one of the greatest examples of that could be if we spread their pollen to Mars or other worlds because of that beauty. And then so in that case, they're using us. And then there's a mutualism there because we get the value of seeing them and connecting with them, and they get the value of spreading and continuing, which is a drive that life has.
What is the state of space exploration in the U.S. and in the world?
Yeah, there are things that are really incredible happening right now and some things that are highly problematic. Again, right now in the world, there are several nations that are very much focused on the militarization of space for competition against each other. Then there is lack of cooperation in some places in space exploration. So for instance, with Russia, when it was the Soviet Union, during the Cold War era, One of the greatest examples of us cooperating together and envisioning a better future together was when we shared joint space missions. And very, very early on, after we had the first few successes on both sides, the Soviets had, the most amazing successes right out the door. They had, the first object went into space. They had the first human to orbit the planet, the first other creatures sent to space, and things like that. Well, I guess America sent fruit flies first, but we had a lot of other things that the Russians accomplished. The first woman in space. But then, the U.S., we had this idea of the space race. The U.S. was very far behind, but then they successfully got to the moon and had people walk on the moon.
For sure, we made it to the moon.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it'd be so I love when, these people think that the moon landing was a hoax. And it's unfortunate, but definitely those people don't understand project management at all. They don't understand what it's like to get even a small group. If you had a group of 5 people in your team or 10 people, or you run a small company of 50 people or 100 people, getting all of those people to agree together on something is extremely difficult. Mm-hmm. To get to the moon and land on the moon required thousands and thousands of people, so many people working in different industries, the astronauts themselves who had the experience, some of whom were greatly changed spiritually and psychologically by that experience, by the way. To have all of those people collectively lie and get the lie straight for so many decades is just, it's highly unlikely. And honestly, all of the claims made by the conspiracists who believe the moon landing was faked have easily been debunked over the past several decades. It is a travesty we haven't gone back yet. And that might change soon. It could be China, the Chinese Space Agency, the CNSA. They could be the first to send people back to the moon. The U.S. currently is working on Artemis, though right now, politically, currently, we are cutting a lot of funding for NASA. We're reducing a lot of people who are working at NASA. All of that's going to impact our capabilities to do any kind of space exploration science and space engineering through NASA for quite some time. And so there are problems right now happening in the space industry that we see. It also has some promise, though. So if we reduce the capabilities of NASA, it means that other organizations like the European Space Agency, the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, the Chinese Space Agency, they all then have a chance to be more successful, because then that opens windows for them to go fill and a lot more missions that they can fund and a lot more things they can do. But yeah, so there's really cool things happening right now in space. A lot of folks, of course, will have heard of Starlink. Elon Musk's SpaceX company has been launching thousands of satellites. They want to launch over tens of thousands of satellites. The downside of this is that currently those satellites reflect a lot of light back to Earth. It means that one of the single most ancient of our heritages that we share with our ancestors, of looking at the stars at night on a dark night and feeling connected to those stars far away, it might be somewhat stripped from our offspring in the future. We are probably among the last generation who could ever look at the sky at night on a dark night in a dark place and not see a satellite immediately. And even now, in dark places, like here in Colorado, it's really hard for those of us with trained eyes. Usually when I look up at the sky at night on a dark night, I usually see a satellite within 5 minutes. It happens pretty fast because there's so many of them. If Starlink and other companies now also want to do this, they want to launch these large constellations of satellites. If they all do that as well, and we have not tens of thousands of satellites, but maybe 100,000 or 200,000 satellites, it's going to mean that almost any time you look at the sky at night, you're going to see just zinging lights flicking back and forth of satellite technologies. And so our skies are going to be far different in the future than our ancestors' skies were. And for astronomy, it's impactful. So a lot of astronomers who do observations through ground-based observatories have already been pointing out and blowing the whistle. They've been saying, this is really competing with our observations of the heavens. And even though, yes, we can build space telescopes, building and maintaining space telescopes and getting time on them, it's far more expensive, far more laborious. We do so much more ground-based observation. And so we're losing that. But there's also an upside to all this. And so that's why there's never a black and white. There's never a yes and no. You always have to consider the full depth, the nuance of a situation. With all of these satellites going up, it means that more people around the world who traditionally did not have access to the internet due to issues locally for connectivity, for government issues of actually allowing them to have access to the internet, we're going to start hearing a lot more voices, especially from people who traditionally have not had access to the internet and to connecting their voices and seeing what the rest of us are saying. We're going to start seeing that change soon. It'll only be a matter of time until people in, for instance, places like North Korea, where most people are not allowed to be online. They can't access the internet. They can't see what else is happening in the world outside their country. It's only a matter of time until somehow some of those people start getting these Starlink and these other satellite-based Wi-Fi technologies that will allow them to just jump online and see what's happening, to join us all. It's going to lead to a large democratization of the internet. It's going to change our voices a lot, and I think it's a very powerful and important thing. I just wish the way it was happening wasn't, to make someone become a trillionaire.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Elon? Who is he to our to us?
Yeah, some people, they look at someone like Elon Musk, being given his wealth and what he's doing in technologies and the way he invests, and has hired really high-end engineers and smart people to work for him in his companies to help them move very fast. He's had that Silicon Valley kind of mindset of like iteration at all costs, just keep building and iterating and improving all the time. Trying to fight against regulation that wants to protect the environment to hold him back. He just wants to launch and do those things. Or Tesla, they've done so many incredible things with the technologies they're developing. He's done incredible things. And so a lot of people, they see him like, a Rockefeller or Carnegie, from back in this other industrial era where things have been changing. And, we see that now with some of the other billionaires in our world who are building things like AI systems and other rocket companies and who run Amazon and things like that. When we see them competing against each other often, we see them supporting each other sometimes. So I first met Elon in 2007. I was an intern at NASA Ames, and all of us working in my small cohort, we went down to Southern California together near LA, where Elon had SpaceX back then. And back then, like their mission command center was basically a semi-trailer where they had built some computers and things in there to launch their rockets. That's back when they were still launching in the Kwajalein Island chain in the South Pacific, because NASA, due to Lockheed Martin primarily, hadn't given them permission to launch from Kennedy Space Center. And I met him right after his very first successful launch at SpaceX. And it was cool. Like he drove in a really high-end sports car, but jumped out wearing jeans and a t-shirt and some old sneakers, and instantly walked up, smile on his face and greeted all of us. And then he had lunch that day with all of his employees, because back then SpaceX was very small. And so we all sat together with all of his employees at this long table and had just really wonderful lunch. And it was really cool. It was inspirational to hear him speak about his visions for the future. So unlike what we hear hear about now through things like X, which was Twitter, and a lot of the things he shares and posts, he was entirely apolitical. He was so inspirational, and he was talking about how we need to develop now better technologies to get rid of fossil fuels. We need electric vehicles and larger electrification of the grid so that we can get less combustion engines in all these distributed places, and instead have more centralized processes of not just fossil fuel combustion, but also things like nuclear energy. They talked a lot about that, and how we can have centralized energy production areas, or how each home could be covered in solar panels. We have so much sunlight coming to our planet. The plants have figured it out. Why can't we do it? We should be using this sunlight. It's so much energy, and the potential for sunlight is way more than anything we can do right now with nuclear, far more than any fossil fuel, and way more than coal. Coal's long dead and should be. But yeah, so it was inspirational. He talked about AI and his fears of AI. He actively talked about how AI could be a problem for our future, and some of these technologies we're developing might be used by militaries and things like that. He was very thoughtful. He talked about becoming multiplanetary. He made really good arguments, and arguments that I still agree with today, about why we should go to Mars and other worlds, and why we should get ourselves to a point where humans can go explore the stars. It's not just because of the sheer want for exploration. It's not just because of the return on investment in space, which is humongous. Some estimates are anything from $4 to $1 or $25 to $1 of what we get back from exploring space. It's incredible. It's one of the largest returns on investment you can have in any technology sector across the planet. But he also argued that there are existential threats that our planet has faced in the past, and some of which we will most likely face again, and sometimes we can't know when those things happen. Things like a supervolcano explosion could really decimate much of humanity for a very long time. A large impactor from space. We've now seen the third interstellar object. So we have most of the asteroids, the big ones, are mapped out. We know what the orbits are. We know if they could potentially cross our path. Most of them are harmless. We have a good idea of some of the comets, not all of them by any means. We're missing many, many comets that could come flying into our solar system soon, maybe on a path towards Earth. And now we have these much faster moving interstellar objects. If one of those hits our planet, it would be devastating. And so we face various existential threats. Now we face AGI as an existential threat. Having other bastions of humanity out there is a pretty good idea. And so, like I said, in 2007, I found Elon Musk inspirational. And I was glad to see someone like him who had made so much money by being given so much money and then knowing how to invest that in his own ways, but also by building technologies, using that money to then invest in technology and build new technologies, selling his older companies, and then using that money to buy SpaceX, to buy Tesla, build these things out. It was incredible. And I've met him a few times, glancingly since then at various conferences and meetings where he's spoken. And then, of course, now like everyone hears his voice. Anyone who uses Twitter or X, as the name has changed to, almost has to hear from Elon. It's almost impossible now to block him because the algorithm almost forces you to see what he's posting several hundred times a day. Even though it seems like he must have people posting on his behalf. It's too much.
That's wild.
But yeah, and it's all gotten out of hand. And I think. A lot of people now are angry at him for his political beliefs, for the way he supported Donald Trump, for instance, in the last election, even though he and Trump have now had a falling out. A lot of people are angry at him for the way that he's changed Twitter itself into more of this right-leaning kind of platform in X. And I've seen it myself. Like, the best scientists and all of the real cool research going on, it's all shifting over to Blue Sky now. So Blue Sky is a social media platform. There's way more engaging conversations there. People are sharing real science a lot more there now. There's only a few of us left on X because we had huge engagements and followings there, and we don't want to leave it. Yeah. But in some ways, it's making us leave because anytime you share cool research, it just isn't coming up the way that any kind of conspiratorial or really emotionally charged kind of stuff does. And so, I'm kind of sad for Elon to have gone this direction, and I do kind of wish that he might change course yet.
What do you think inspired him to change course?
Yeah, and I honestly think, and this is just personal belief, personal opinion, I think sometimes at a certain level of wealth and power, it's very easy to get surrounded by enough people who say yes all the time, no matter what you say or do, who also they want to feel a little bit of the glory or perhaps get some money or get some power from you. We've seen that a lot in our politicians and world leaders in the past, where it's easy for people with a lot of power to become surrounded by those who celebrate them and their deeds, no matter what those deeds are. And sometimes it could be hard, I think, for them then to view anything they do as potentially wrong, or to have reason to judge themselves, or to think about, how did this hurt somebody? How did this hurt me? How did this change someone? And so, yes, I worry for Elon that he's in a place where there's enough people now on the planet who glorify him in such a way that he kind of feels like an emperor of a civilization. And in very many ways he is. The new sovereign spaces aren't, with national boundaries. The new sovereign spaces are built in the internet. They're spaces of control, like social media platforms and various networks. They're places where your voice is amplified and things like that. And for Elon, he bought a very large social media platform and faced a lot of people who argued against him, as well as a lot of people who supported him. And so it might feel better for a very short-term reward to go along with those who tell you that you're doing good no matter what.
What do you think of what Jeff Bezos is doing with Blue Origin? How is he similar to Elon? How is he different? What's the status of their work?
Yeah, Blue Origin is doing awesome stuff as well. And I should say I have friends who work for SpaceX. I have friends who work for Blue Origin. Awesome companies, great people, very smart people. They're doing lots of great things, even though some things they have done have been questionable or might cause issues in our future. I feel the same way with Blue Origin. Blue Origin is launching a lot of tourist flights now, so they've sent a lot of people into space. Maybe perhaps most famously is the NS-31, the New Shepard 31 mission earlier this year. I think it was in April. It was the first all-female crew of more than one woman going to space by herself. It was the first time several women went to space together. And it received a lot of blowback online. People claiming they didn't deserve it. Because Katy Perry went, and people thought, why should a musician with celebrity and power have a chance to go and not other people? And I think it sadly missed the mark a lot for a lot of people of the value of these women going to space and having this experience of seeing our world from the outside together, and understanding their own trials and tribulations in their lives and what it took to get there. A lot of people judged their experience of awe. Some people said that it was too short of a time in space for Katy Perry to have kissed the ground upon returning to Earth. But you don't get to judge somebody else's awe experience. For her, that might have been transcendent. It might have been the few minutes of the most miraculous experience of her life. And so I was a little bummed out when I saw so much hate. And I think a lot of it was driven by misogynistic behaviors online by a lot of men primarily, who thought like women going to space together is a silly thing or a terrible thing. But there were also some really good arguments from people pointing out that, right now where the world is, with current tragedies happening, warfare happening, with our politics being what it is, that maybe now is not the right time to celebrate people of exceptional wealth and power having little joyrides into space. And I get those arguments. I do get those arguments. Even though I would go to space right now if someone offered that to me. I would love that. Amazing experience. And I think for me, just like meditation, just like psychedelic experiences, I would use that experience of going to space and looking back as another way to improve myself, and to also help me want to improve others and share that experience. And a lot of people who've gone to space have felt that way. They felt a drive to share that and try to uplift other people. And that's a great experience. We should have more of those experiences. We should all have small everyday moments of wonder and awe, and also these humongous transcendent experiences of wonder and awe. But I do understand some of these arguments against space tourism. But Blue Origin is basically a little bit of a step behind SpaceX right now, but they're trying to kind of do their own thing with space tourism, with building new rocket systems that might one day go to the International Space Station or be part of larger governmental processes in space exploration and sending crews to space. They're also working on their own Wi-Fi satellite constellation. And so a lot of things they're doing are very similar to what SpaceX is doing. Just right now, SpaceX, and people aren't aware of this in general, but SpaceX right now is the most successful launch company on the entire planet. They're sending more stuff into space than anyone else. And no government is sending as much stuff to space as SpaceX is. SpaceX is funded by the U.S. government. SpaceX is given money by the DoD, by the military to launch stuff. They're given money by NASA to launch stuff, but SpaceX right now is launching more into space than anyone else.
Why is NASA losing some of its funding? What are some of the reasons around that?
As sad as it is in our current political climate, the current presidential administration in particular is opposed to government funding for things like education, for communication, and various realms of science, especially Earth observation and understanding our planet. There are various unfortunate, motivated reasons for that. So, for instance, when it comes to understanding climate change, climate change is a fact. It's happening. It's happened in the past on our planet. Climate change is always happening on our planet.
Naturally.
It's always happened on our planet. A humongous volcanic explosion leaving what we call large igneous provinces alters the climate for years. The last time Yellowstone erupted certainly altered our climate for quite some time. And so we do have those little blasts, those little times like that when the climate changes really quickly and then kind of comes back to itself. There have been times of glaciation where glaciers have moved down the planet, and then times when it's all melted back again and then it's gotten very hot for a while. But generally, a lot of these periods are rather slow geologically. A lot of them happen under kind of like geological periods where they ebb and wane, kind of come back and forth. What we're experiencing now in recent records is the quickest our planet has ever heated up in a very, very long time, and we know humans are responsible. We can point to the emissions of not just carbon dioxide, even though that's the big one, also methane, also putting more water into the atmosphere. So water vapor is also a very strong greenhouse gas. Luckily, there are processes that take water out of the atmosphere, and the same thing for methane too. But we're pumping methane, we're pumping nitrogen-containing gases, sulfur-containing gases that are also all greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and lots of carbon dioxide, at a rate at which the traditional processes of biology and geology that would remove carbon dioxide aren't keeping up. So traditionally, our planet has a thermostat where life itself can take the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere through plants, through other creatures that will take in the carbon dioxide and lock it up in biological material, sometimes in shells, in calcium carbonate in creatures in the ocean, sometimes in plant-based material, woody trunks of trees and things like that. A lot of times in phytoplankton that will then eventually sink down through the ocean or get embedded in the bodies of fish, or then whales that also sink down to the bottom of the ocean. And those materials will get subducted down into the mantle. So it takes that carbon and puts it back inside the earth. That process is exceedingly slow geologically and biologically. And so right now, the process appears to be speeding up at a rate at which we just don't know what's going to happen. And we really don't know. So there are people who are alarmed by it, and I think you should be. We don't know what the long-term impact of this all is going to be, but we know it's moving so fast that it's making it harder for us to know what's going to happen. So it makes it harder for us to model where this might take our planet, how our planet might rebound from it. And currently, unfortunately, the current presidential administration in the U.S. is very opposed to any scientific understanding of climate change, in particular, observing our climate from space. So we have many telescopes that observe the Earth from space for various reasons, measuring carbon, measuring water content on the planet, using cameras to observe changes on our world through time, to do better weather monitoring so we can get better emergency announcements when weather is coming. And NASA also funds a lot of Earth science in general, understanding our rainforests, understanding transport processes in the atmosphere. And a lot of that science right now has been targeted for deletion as fast as possible by our current government. And so we are, even though I don't want to be super political, I will say we are living through the most anti-science time in U.S. history.
What do you think the motivation is to become an anti-science country?
Yeah, it's hard. We're in an age of charlatanism and being bamboozled. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Recently, a study came out showing that the number of American adults over the age of 18 who read books for pleasure is now dropping significantly. It's something like 16% now. American adults are reading less. They're having less rational conversations. A lot of people are now going to the internet, to social media for the news. And a lot of that news is often biased by their own social media echo chambers. They're seeing and hearing the things that support presupposed, pre-held beliefs, and not really seeing a full range or a neutral range of the information available to them. And I'm as guilty of that as anyone. I try my hardest to break through the echo chamber as much as I can, and try to experience other viewpoints, but it's exceedingly hard in social media space. And so now, because of the internet, if you have any viewpoint, you can go online and find somebody else who shares that viewpoint for the most part. And sometimes those are very negative viewpoints. We're also in a very weird place when it comes to how misinformation can be used to guide us. And a lot of times it's being used to sell products. And so people can use, these little bits of information on social media to make us feel good for a moment or make us angry for a moment, however they're doing it. Using that emotional reactivity is more likely to make someone want to act impulsively instead of constructively. And we're just moving away from these moments of having a rational discourse and a more civil conversation. We've gotten really bad at having conversations with people who we disagree with or disagree with us. It's very, very common that, rather than saying, hey, I don't agree with that, here's why, enlighten me as to why you don't agree, that kind of thing. These days, it's just shouting matches on the internet. It's what some have called outrage porn, and we've led ourselves into this place. We've allowed ourselves to come to this place. Aldous Huxley, who famously wrote about the doors of perception and psychedelics in society and ways that meditation and such can impact us, he also wrote an early fable called Brave New World, where he kind of intimated a possible future of a government controlling people by giving it emotional reactivity and telling people what to think, driving misinformation. But a lot of folks don't know that Huxley came back many years later. I think it was nearly 2 decades later, and he wrote a really fantastic short book of essays called Brave New World Revisited, basically looking back on his fable of this brave new world, this future of control, very 1984-esque as well. And then he used that, as well as looking back on World War II, what happened with Nazi propaganda and U.S. propaganda, and propaganda in the U.S. during World War II and even afterwards was, flying off the rails and trying to control how people think about the enemy and the otherness. It happened with the Japanese internment camps, for instance, in the U.S. People were taught to hate Japanese people, even Japanese American people who'd been here for generations. And we did that through propaganda and control. And so Huxley had seen that. He'd seen the way the Nazis had led an entire nation into this realm of hatred so deep that they could drive the Holocaust, to drive that level of genocide. And we see that today as well. We still have these drives towards just eliminating people because they're different, we disagree, and then it's propaganda. It's propaganda and control from various actors, sometimes the state, sometimes various action groups, sometimes various businesses, because they want you to think a certain way or do a certain thing, buy a certain thing, or hate a certain person. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And so I highly encourage anyone to read Huxley's writings, because even though it was the 1950s, he was looking forward to what the Cold War might do. And I just reread it fairly recently, and it's amazing how much it speaks to what we're doing right now as well in things like our journalism, our social media, how we're using various substances that we take into our bodies, how we're led to emotional reactivity. It is a fantastic read for someone who really wants to get their head around this current moment.
What are some of the ways people can cut through the propaganda? How can people free themselves? How can people gain just clarity and truth?
Yeah, it's so hard. All of us are just as bound as anyone else to, like, you see that social media meme pop up that says exactly the political thing you've been thinking, and you're like, oh, I want to like it, I want to share it because it agrees with my anger. We need to be able to step back for a moment and say, maybe I should think for a minute. Maybe I should stop for a minute. Viktor Frankl, who famously was in the concentration camp, 2 concentration camps during World War II, and then later wrote about the value of meaning and finding meaning in our lives. He wrote a fantastic book called Man's Search for Meaning. He spoke of this realm in between stimulus and response, where that's where we actually have a chance to do something. It's one of the reasons I find meditation so valuable. Meditation helps us in our time perception to expand the moment when we need to. The moment someone cuts you off in traffic in your car, and by the way, I think the worst version of me is me alone driving in rush hour traffic in any major city. It's just,
probably most people.
yeah,
Why
it's
is
just,
that?
You're so angry, and then the person who cut you off or did the thing, like you think the worst things about that person in that
crazy.
moment. You're like, I want to cause that person harm. They must be an idiot. Why aren't they doing things right? Why aren't they living right? What is wrong with them? And like we never take the time to like interrogate that and be like, maybe they didn't see me. Maybe they were on, just in that moment where their brains were on autopilot. Yeah. Maybe they're having a hard day. Maybe their boss just fired them. Maybe they just had a major relationship issue. Like we don't know what the issue is. We never know what the issue is. And sometimes, maybe they just did a bonehead thing. Yeah. I've done it before where like I cut someone off or did something stupid, and I, you try to wave at them, they give you the finger as they drive by. It's like, like I love the Vulcan salute, like, please live long and prosper. I didn't mean to do that, but it's like that happens. And so like we need to find that moment in between the stimulus, the thing, because it's so easy. Our base brains often tell us to go to that really simple response. And historically, and it comes from a good place evolutionarily, it helps us to avoid predation. It helps us to make sure we're protecting the tribe. The very first thing to do as soon as the moment happens is to act instantly and do so, with full fight or flight mode. I'm gonna kill you, stab you, knock you out, or I'm gonna run as fast as I can to get away from the leopard or the cheetah that's attacking me. And that reaction, it saved our species. It was a very important part of our evolution. But if we want to come into our next evolution as a species, we need to learn when that moment is helpful and when it's really not. And most of the time, it's really not. Most of the time, when the stimulus happens and our thought is to jump or react or do something, 9 times out of 10, like sometimes it's important. Like I see a child about to get hit by a car, I'm going to run as fast as I can. Like I know that there's no time to think about it. I'm going to do it. But most of the time, someone cut you off in traffic. We need to not jump to the stimulus, the response from the stimulus right away. We need that moment. to find ourselves, take a deep breath, recenter, and then sometimes there is a response that's needed, and it's not a pretty one. But most of the time, we're going to find that the best response is just to let it go on, figure out how you can live a better day, because we can't control how others think and what they do. But we can, if we have a better day, maybe pay it forward later in the day to somebody else who just had a hard moment as well. It can really inspire us a lot more if we just figure out how to live in that moment.
It's not good for my health when I hold on to anger towards someone else that they don't even know. They don't even know I exist because they just cut me off. So for me, practicing forgiveness and sometimes even praying for that person to really, if I ever feel an edge with anyone, I just pray for them, and it dissipates any of that anger.
Yeah, forgiveness is so potent. Forgiveness and gratitude, they come together all the time. And I think for ourselves as well, we need forgiveness. Like, we often, we want to judge ourselves, we with the same thing, like stimulus and response. Like, we had a hard moment, you and I have both done public speaking. I've met a lot of people who, like, they had a hard moment on stage, or they had to give a speech in front of a class, or to their office at work, and they felt bad in the moment. They felt like everyone was judging them. And so they had the stimulus, and instead of having the moment to think about it and really rationalize through it, and give themselves forgiveness for the judgment, and to be grateful that they had the experience and that they know that they can improve next time. A lot of times, a lot of people jump to that conclusion instantly. Like the response is, oh, I'm terrible. I'm not good. Everyone hates me. Everyone's judging me. And there's this weird thing, like most of the time, when we think somebody else is judging us for something that we did, even if it was something kind of stupid, like we messed up and we did something kind of dumb, we have this thing where we hold on to this judgment that we personify in other people. We're like, well, they're judging me. And then it's so easy to fall into a system of hopelessness and despair where it's like, I'm always bad. Everyone's judging me. I can't fix it. If we could just give ourselves some of that forgiveness too, and some of that gratitude for just the sheer fact that we get to exist, just have a moment and be like, okay, maybe somebody else is judging me sometimes. That's nothing I can do about that,
But they're probably not. Most people do not care. Really, almost, it's like our moms care about us sometimes, and nobody else even cares.
Yeah, most people are so busy in their own heads, thinking about their own judgments of themselves and others, and that, like, we're all this machine, just embodying judgment and criticism out there in the world, when a little bit of forgiveness and some gratitude, it can take us to amazing places.
Have you read The Four Agreements?
No, I haven't.
By Don Miguel Ruiz. It's he's got a lot of books. He's a Stoic, and he has the agreements of always do your best, don't lie, like tell the truth. What else are they? Don't make assumptions and don't take things personally. And just following those is like drastically shifted my life. Hardest for me is to not take things personally, but then assumptions come in. Sharing that with friends, with my girlfriend, with my family, and now having like a shared language, like a very simple base in which to help hold myself and others accountable has been really helpful.
Yeah, well, that's so powerful. Absolutely. And like, trying to be the best for yourself, or to do well for yourself, to do good in the world, it doesn't mean that you have to be the best person ever, or that you can't get things wrong. Sometimes we put ourselves up there, where it's like, well, if I did something wrong, then I'm not doing my best. I think just trying your best as often as possible to do good is a powerful thing. And these ideas of like just finding ways to center yourself are so powerful. I'll have to read this book. It sounds great.
Yeah, it's like a 30-minute read. I've probably read it 10 times.
Fantastic.
Yeah, super easy. And I wonder what of those sounds hardest for you. Don't take things personally. Don't make assumptions. Tell the truth and do your best.
Yeah, wow. Taking things personally, I think, is probably the hardest for me as well, and I think probably for most people. With assumptions, one reason I love science so much, and science itself is a tool, and it's an evolving tool. It's one that's changed through time, is really, at the end of the day, science isn't just like a bullshit detector to try to figure out what's real or not in the universe. Science can always change. We might change our ideas about what reality is through science in the next decades or century, who knows? But science is a way of reminding ourselves to be humble about our assumptions. And everyone is guilty of this. It's very easy to just fall into this pattern where, again, through like confirmation bias, you think your assumptions must be correct. And so, like I said, I love this idea of saying I don't know when you don't have information, or saying we don't know when science or human knowledge doesn't really know what happened in some place in the universe or in our place in the cosmos. Mm-hmm. But it does help you to think a little bit about, maybe I should go back and just consider my assumptions. Descartes did this well in his meditations, where he's like, he's like sitting alone in the room. And he's trying to figure out like how much of my assumptions can I literally like remove from my experience, my conscious awareness. Like if I try to assume that everything is being fed to me by some evil demon or deity out there, and everything that I'm experiencing or telling myself I'm experiencing is probably not real, like what is the base thing? And so that's how he got to cogito ergo sum, which is I think therefore I am. All he could say is that I am. I'm experience. I'm the thing that is having an experience. That was the base. And that's what you have in meditation as well. Like, I am the experience. I am in this place. Everything else could be wrong. And so trying to remove those assumptions and bring yourself back to the base is a very powerful thing. It's also part of why having meditative experiences or psychedelic experiences and learning those ways to remove that autobiographical memory that tells you that you're the center of the universe, that everything is around you, everyone's judging you, all those things, and instead view the larger connection. I am here. Here's everything else, but I'm connected to it in these very beautiful and intricate ways. It's very powerful to have that. And so I think science itself, it can help bring that to society.
This is the Plant Frequencies podcast, and I've just been so interested in so many different things that we've talked about. I do want to bring it back to plants a little bit.
Heck yeah.
Which plants are in your life the most right now?
Oh man,
what are you eating? What are you growing? What are you spending time with?
Well, I have a child, and so I'm kind of guided by what he wants to eat when it comes to what we consume for plant material. So lots of broccoli, things like that. We love salads at home. He's really into carrots. There's a lot of plants and plant materials that he enjoys eating. A lot of fruits he's really into. I actually, for a long time, wasn't eating very many fruits due to the sugar content. I was trying to cut back on sugar for a while, but then I realized I'm missing out on the thing I loved the most as a kid. I loved fruit, and so I'm kind of like getting back into like just eating fruits, just straight up, just like getting an apple and just biting through it and having that moment where like just you feel it inside of you, like the power of the apple coming through.
I think as long as you eat it before a meal, for me especially in the morning is really good on an empty stomach. Where it can goof people up is if they eat a whole protein-heavy meal and then have their fruit as a dessert. Well, that fruit is fermenting on top, and that's where you don't feel so good.
That's a good point. Yeah, I like it before I work out too. So I find that helpful. And so I do appreciate plants for the psychedelic experiences that can be offered. I'm very thankful that I was invited into a group for an ayahuasca ceremony led by an elder with indigenous experience and knowledge that has been shared with him and passed down through a lineage through time. I preferred to have that experience, but there's very many ways to have experiences with psychedelic plants.
I think when you are paying homage and respecting the lineage and the tradition, that's a good way to do it, especially when it's in a very safe and thoughtful container.
Yeah,
otherwise,
agreed.
it can be a negative experience.
Yeah, very much so. And when I was young, a young teenager, I'd tried various psychedelics, and it was more like it was the party vibe. It was like the trying to get high kind of thing. And at first, I thought like I was going through the doors, of perception, the windows of perception. I was like really having these crazy experiences, but it got out of hand, and very quickly was just me just using drugs.
Sure.
Whereas now, or abusing drugs, I guess is the better point. Now it's more, using the experience for myself and the connectivity to the plants and fungi to really just experience myself in a way I haven't before, and to feel connection in a way I haven't before. And I find it very valuable to have that connection to ancestral humans as well through the lineage and through the practice. And so it's really brought some amazing things out in my own life. And then plants in general,
just staying on that, why do you think there's so much wisdom and knowledge within these plants?
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's consciousness. So going back to we don't really know what life, intelligence, or consciousness are. So for me, like I said before, we don't really know what life, intelligence, or consciousness really are. We do have some idea of what life, intelligence, and consciousness do, to varying degrees. And with life, like we have a good idea of the kinds of things life does, enough so for us to look for life on other planets and have some idea of what to look for. It gets a little bit harder with intelligence. It gets very hard with consciousness. And with consciousness and understanding sentience and this awareness of being, there's kind of like two kind of extremes of thought right now. We could classify things as one of them is like the pure reductionist, materialistic, kind of like traditional scientific view from the 1800s scientist view, like staunch reductionism, where it's consciousness evolved in us humans because our brains evolved to allow consciousness to happen inside of our brain separately. So we are all separately conscious. In that case, our consciousness isn't really connected outside of us sharing our perceptions and our culture and our communicating what we're experiencing, and then using that communication to basically kind of write our own consciousness based on what we think somebody else is experiencing. There's another side of it, of what consciousness might be, which is argued it's panpsychism. Panpsychism is an argument that consciousness itself is another force or another property of the entire universe, of the cosmos, that everything is consciousness and it pervades the universe, and that rather than developing separate conscious experiences in our brains, that maybe our neurological systems for us and other organisms across the planet that have different kinds of connectivity or different kinds of molecular structures have tapped into whatever this is. Maybe this consciousness out there is actually allowing all of us to be connected in various ways. And sometimes that feels very like woo-woo and fringe and pseudoscience to a lot of people. It's very hard to test that. So with traditional science, it doesn't really fit into a worldview of traditional science where things have to be empirical and testable. But it's still an intriguing view because many of us have had those experiences where you feel like you're connected to somebody else, where you had a dream about your mother for the first time maybe in months. You woke up and she called you. Mm-hmm. And there are some who've argued that could be like the law of small numbers. Sometimes it's there's other ideas psychologically of like when we make things appear bigger to ourselves because they feel like they are connection. But some of us have those experiences of like deja vu, or we have experiences where we feel connected to another person in a way that it feels deeper than just talking to each other or smelling each other and things like that. But yeah, some of us we have these conscious experiences with fungi and with plants. And even experiences where like you're in nature and you're not just having an experience of wonder and awe, you actually feel like this depth of connection. Like all itself is like this deep connection to these vast mysteries that we're experiencing in the universe. And so maybe it is just an experience of awe as an emotional connection that makes us feel like something is deeper. But for some of us, it really feels like something is happening that's way deeper. And it almost the experience itself is a conscious sharing. Again, that's why I personally don't begrudge those who feel like in the depths of these experiences that they've spoken to past family members or to people that don't exist or things that don't exist, or they feel that they've had a conscious connection to an alien civilization or an alien being out there. Even though I don't believe that's real, to me, they're having an experience, and I can't deny them that experience. And so, some of us have had these connective experiences that do make us wonder, maybe we're not, the whole way in the reductionist spectrum. Maybe we are somewhere more in the middle of these various possibilities, or maybe even closer to a universe of connection.
This podcast is brought to you by B Micro, organic freeze-dried microgreens for easy, natural nutrition. Sprinkle them on any meal and enjoy the benefits. Shop now at bmicro.farm and use code STEVE15 to save.
Well, in my time with psychedelics, I was inspired to move from a decade career of software sales into helping spread these plants. And especially ones that are very detoxifying, that help prepare the body for deeper work, sitting with ayahuasca, or just helping with to age in a good way. I'd love to gift you one of my products. I know you've purchased products many times, but I have a new one here. It's our Booster Blend. And it's a mixture of broccoli, radish, red cabbage, and our lab tests show it activates the Nerve-2 pathway about 3 times as much as broccoli on its own. So people want broccoli for the sulforaphane. That activates the Nerve-2 pathway, which empowers the body to detoxify itself. This blend is about 3 times as powerful as that.
Sweet.
Yeah, what's your experience with microgreens? How come you've been a customer besides just being a friend?
So not only my company, Blue Marble Space, we had an initiative for some time called Green Space, where some of our colleagues in Pennsylvania have currently a microgreen growing farm. They sell microgreens, whole microgreens locally in farmers markets in Pennsylvania around places like State College and Lake Raystown. They also sell salads out of their storefront in Huntington in Pennsylvania. We have now spun that off, and so they're their own business now. They've left the nonprofit that we run. But I've also grown microgreens at home because they're fantastic plants, and there's so much more research that's come out over the past many years showing the value of the phytochemicals we can get from these plants. And of course, I've tried now freeze-dried, lyophilized microgreens. One thing I like with that is that they are shelf-stable because someone like me, I travel a lot. I do most of the cooking for my family when I am home, but I also travel a lot. And so when I'm gone, it's harder for the family to have, a consistent kind of, structure of diet to keep things in the refrigerator. We know we're going to eat. And so having microgreens in the fridge can be problematic because they don't always last. And so having shelf-stable microgreens is fantastic. I can add a little bit here and there to various things I cook, and that I put in my son's lunchbox and things like that. So it means a lot for me to have that and have you and your company as a source of that. But I think there's so much more value for us in trying to help others understand our human need for these phytochemicals that we've co-evolved with for so long. Currently, especially in the U.S., the average U.S. Americans, the American's diet is lacking in nutrition, and very much so. I remember one time a few years ago, I heard, and I forget who said this now, that for many Americans, their primary source of phytonutrients is the coffee they drink. And coffee itself is fantastic. I love coffee. But there's not a lot of phytonutrients in coffee because most coffees, we strip the outside of the berry. We only roast the bean in most cases. It's one of my favorite coffees I've ever had, and I love ordering every now and then, is from Costa Rica. It's a natural sun-dried coffee where they dry and then roast, the sun roast the bean inside of the berry. And so you get all those beautiful phytonutrients from the berry in the coffee as well. But a lot of Americans, on typical diets, consuming a lot of fast foods and things like that, I don't want to judge. Everyone's life is different. Some people are struggling to make ends meet. They have to go from, their 9-to-5 job or their 9-to-9 job and just grab a quick meal and get home. They're having trouble feeding their kids anything that they will eat. And so, if your kid's only eating McDonald's cheeseburgers at the end of the day, that's what it's going to be. At least your kid's eating. That's the important part, that we're getting some kind of nutrition. But gosh, I wish we could help Americans get a little bit more away from all of the ultra-processed foods that we're eating and just get some more whole foods into our diets, getting some more of these nutrients that we know are so crucial to having a longer, healthy existence.
Any encouragement within our current administration and the new Health and Human Services Secretary, I think I'm saying that right, RFK, and what he's doing to help drive out some of these processed foods, ingredients, less subsidies for them, sugary things, and just to help clean up some of that supply chain?
Yeah, RFK is a hard character because he's doing some things that a lot of us have wanted for a long time, like removing artificial dyes from our food in the U.S. We don't know fully the extent of what are some of these, mostly petroleum derivatives. It mostly comes from the oil industry. A lot of our derivatives, even our sweeteners for things like Sweet and Low and stuff like that, a lot of those are oil derivatives. They come from oil and gas companies trying to figure out how to use all the leftover gunk that comes out of refining oil. And there's a lot of products we use from that process. It goes into our plastics that we're littered with across our country. It goes into a lot of things we use in laundry detergents and soaps and all kinds of stuff. A lot of it comes from oil and gas industry. And so a lot of these dyes and these other things we have being put into our food, a lot of this comes from petroleum refining. And a lot of nations have now banned these substances because we don't need them. We have natural substances. You don't need red a red dye that you get from oil when you have beet juice, and it's naturally red, and it comes from a substance we've co-evolved with. And so there are a lot of substances, honestly, we just shouldn't have in our foods. We don't need them. And
that many countries don't have.
That many countries don't
Canada,
have because
Europe.
they have really great regulation. Because scientists as well as citizens have argued we don't want this in our food until we know better. We want better scientific research before we spend decades allowing our children to eat it. And so I agree with that. I think we really should be doing the scientific research. In some cases, there isn't enough research to say whether or not a substance can be harmful. In some other instances, there are some of these substances in our foods where it's like, it's questionable if we should have it or not. So the Subway for a long time had this chemical in their bread. I'm forgetting offhand what the chemical substance. I'm sure your listeners will tell me later en masse. But basically, the same thing we had in yoga mats. It's a very common plastic petroleum derivative, and it was being put in Subway's bread. Get rid of that. We don't need that. And in a lot of cases, the reasons these other kinds of substances are used is because it's cheap and it saves someone at the very top of the company, the board members and the C-suite, they get to make a few $1,000,000 extra a year on top of the tens of millions or hundreds of millions they're already making by doing this. And so at the end of the day, it's not going to hurt their bottom line. Their family is still going to live lives of luxurious generational wealth, and yet the rest of us can actually be a little bit healthier and getting rid of some of that stuff. I agree entirely with that, but RFK Jr. is questionable in other places because he's also shared a lot of pseudoscience. He shared a lot of things that are not proactive, are actually very problematic for a lot of us in the sciences, and he shares a lot of misinformation. I think he has always cared about health. If you go back to when his father unfortunately was assassinated, even back then his father was working on a lot of these topics in health and what we put in our foods. RFK certainly was part of that process and knew a lot about that as a young person, and now now he's an older man. I think he cares, but I think he's also highly misled in some places.
What places stand out most to you?
I think vaccination's a big one for me. So yes, there are concerns about the kinds of companies that are selling vaccines and that try to market vaccines exceedingly quickly. We should question, what else is in the vaccine? What are they doing? But that said, vaccine science is extremely sound. We've known about vaccination for a very long time, and it's been studied so much around the planet. And I think some of what RFK is sharing is very dangerous because vaccination has helped us to, if not eradicate, highly reduce some of the most infectious diseases that have ever come to our planet. And some of those diseases, many of those diseases in particular, target young children. And even RFK himself, was impacted by one of these diseases as a child. If we allow ourselves to be so misled to hate vaccines, even though the science is in support of vaccination, it could lead us to a place where we see a resurgence in measles and polio or other diseases that could come around that we're not even ready for yet. And at the end of the day, the ones who will be hurt the most from that are children, especially children from the most disadvantaged populations. So generally speaking, it's the most marginalized communities who will be the most greatly impacted by a lack of vaccination in our society.
Now, is he anti all vaccines? Do you
know?
So
far, it seems, yeah. He seems very much against vaccination in general, given the statements he's made. Now, granted, he has come out most against the more recent mRNA vaccines. And I agree, the science, it was quick. We did that science exceedingly quickly, but it's also something that was in the works for a long time. People were thinking about how can we do this? How can we create an mRNA vaccine that tells our bodies how to create the mRNAs themselves? And it's ingenious, and we are at a place where
is that a vaccine or is that more like gene therapy?
Kind of both. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Gene therapy, we usually use that word generally to talk about intentional gene manipulation. Using some kind of viral vector, things like that, which is what these vaccines are kind of doing. We don't tend to use gene therapy as a word to describe what these vaccines are, but I guess you could say that. At the end of the day, it is telling our bodies how to produce the mRNAs themselves to make the product, the viral products that give us the immunity. And our cells are just so much better at doing that than actually the process of going through an immune response to viral particles themselves.
What about these companies that make the vaccines here in the U.S. and then they have some type of a blanket protection against any type of litigation against them?
Yeah, so Government regulation is an interesting thing. It has saved us so much historically. It also can be problematic. And so I will give Elon Musk and these other corporations and these billionaires some credit in that in some places they're right. Sometimes government regulation, it's slow, it slows down progress, it slows down good engineering and science, but it's there for a reason. It's there to make sure these companies aren't dumping garbage into our food or into our medications with us not knowing what it is. We've had this issue with China for some time now. China doesn't have as much government regulation, and so there have been a lot of products that's been created in China, sent to other places like the U.S., that have been faulty or contained other materials they shouldn't. Great examples are when the dog food scare happened because Chinese companies were putting other things in dog food that dogs couldn't eat. Same thing for baby formula. There was a breakout of that some time back. It's also happened with drywall. With gypsum and drywall has gotten shipped around the world from these Chinese mines where the gypsum wasn't actually clean gypsum. It was contaminated with sulfur, which became hydrogen sulfide, could leak out through getting wet and then corrode pipes, cause massive issues for plumbing in homes. Government regulation can help us to stop companies from doing that. It allows us to have some oversight of what these companies are doing, so we need that. And so I worry when we have companies that are given kind of, a blanket protection from a government to be able to do whatever they want. That's problematic, and that's scary for a lot of us. And it's part of why I think we need better regulation. But you have to realize, too, like not all those companies are in the U.S. A lot of these companies are headquartered in other countries. They might be producing a lot of stuff in the U.S., but right now some of the biggest pharmaceutical companies are not here. They are selling their drugs here because we pay more for them.
Graham, thank you so much.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
Anything else that you want to share with people?
I speak a lot, mostly online, but also at various places around the world. I'm going to New Zealand here soon, for instance, and I get to talk to a lot of people about astrobiology and alien life and things like plants, like how cool trees are and why there should be alien trees, and the history of plants in our biology and our history on Earth, as well as just the history of life as we know it on our planet. And I would love for everyone when they're going about their day, not just trying to find that moment between the stimulus and the response, to pause and reflect and again think about the value of what you're going to do before you do it. I also encourage everyone, if you can, and I know in some cases people are, they're facing insecurity in food and resource access, they're facing violence, and we need to help those people as much as we can. But I do hope that anyone who can find a moment in their day, in their week, in their month, just to think about, like, what if aliens are out there? What if they're like us? What if they want to come talk? What if we live in a universe where aliens are everywhere and all we need is the next step in human evolution to get out there and go join the Federation, go meet the aliens, and go really experience what it means to be a conscious, experiencing being and civilization in this universe.
Graham, where can people learn more about you, check out your work?
I'm on cosmobiota.com. You can also find me, Cosmobiologist is my handle in most places on the internet. And I use that term instead of astrobiologist because for me, it's not just thinking about life in the stars, it's really placing life in the context of the entire cosmos.